that we had assembled. Probably most relevant to this audience is going to be how we can use this report, and it's pretty expansive. In essence, the CCC will own the report, can publish it, distribute it, post it, etc., at will, as the CCC. um, the individual members, so our individual companies, can have access to the report from a viewing standpoint, can read it, and we can share it internally within our companies. But if member companies wanted to separately distribute it or post it, then we would need to get a separate license from Everest, and they didn't have that price off the top of their head, but they're going to get that to us before we finalize with them. But even they were recommending, while you could do that, you also could just point to the CCC website
Right,
where it's
right.
posted and accomplish pretty much the same mission.
Mm,
We also talked to them about what activities they might do to help kind of distribute and socialize the content. And they said that's up to us. If we say we want to keep it just for ourselves, we can do that. If we allow them to, they will also publish it and share it. And I think most likely that is what we would want, because our goal really is socialization and getting this information out to as broad an audience as possible. And I think that does help get to a more independent viewpoint on the content. uh, the other big thing that we talked to them about was input.
mhm.
And so, we saw from their initial kind of preview of some of the content, we saw areas where it was clear they had some good understanding of the confidential computing market. But then we also, just in that brief, set of slides that they shared with us, we could see gaps. Not all of our member companies were represented. Those were more illustrative of, sample set of the few, and even not all the necessarily the usages and markets were totally covered. And so we were talking to them about how are we as a community going to be able to ensure that they don't have blind spots in their study. And again, they were very open on that. They will be actually basically at the beginning of the study, within a week or two, they would be distributing an RFI to all the participants of the CCC, which basically invites, it has a set of survey questions and invites input on, your view of the market and its trends. And that may include some follow-up meetings for, kind of follow-up interviews. And so that would be part of their primary research, would be to get context and data from all of the CCC members who want to participate. They will also be doing some research outside of the CCC, so it's not just, our own story, but that would be a big part of it. And they also emphasized that all of our contributions would be NDA. They're willing to sign NDAs with anybody, so that even though each of us are submitting our data, they're not going to share it with our fellow CCC members who might, of course, also be competitors in some way. Um, let's see, just going through my notes, they did address the global perspective. They have offices in India, London, and the US, and all of those analysts in each of those regions would be involved. They did they were honest that their view into PRC is a little more limited than some of the other areas, but they said, if that's a requirement of ours, they'll do their best to, of course, connect with the CCC members out of that geography, but then also see what other data they can gather to provide a good view. They don't actually have an office in China, but they they're willing to make sure that that part's included. I think those are the main items that we wanted further clarification on. There was a little debate even amongst our own members on just how far the scope of the research should go. How broad of a confidential computing definition should be used, as far as that market goes. Focus on general purpose compute or expand into kind of special purpose or special function arenas. We'll probably have to do a little bit of discussion on that. They're looking to us to define what what our definition of the market that we want scoped is, and then they're going to meet that definition in their reporting as far as which data they include or exclude. That's about all I gathered. David, others, any other salient points?
No, I think that's a great summary, Jesse. I think the only point I might add to that is we will need to manage the schedule pretty tightly, particularly around the input phase, which I think is really important and great that they're going to do. But I think the responsibility is going to fall to us representing our member companies to make sure that we're providing the input and the reviews and the feedback to Everest in a timely manner, so that we can get the project done in a timely manner.
Yeah, I think, maybe the more blunt way of saying that is everybody's going to have an opportunity to contribute, but the timeline is going to be limited. So if you don't
And the
contribute, you
buses
can't
leave at the
complain.
station after it's done.
Exactly. Not that that's the only data they'll have, but
Right.
if you want to be sure that your slice of the pie is fully comprehended, then that'll be on the responsibility of the members to ensure that.
So Jesse, just to confirm this, because they are looking to us for input, et cetera, will we have the opportunity to review this before they publish a final report, just to make
Yeah.
sure there aren't any
Yes.
glitches?
Yeah, they have actually kind of an iterative cadence. We would actually probably see several before it was truly finalized. It's kind of it's a collaborative relationship in that we're paying for this thing. We're putting a lot of our perspective into it, but then on the other hand, they are still keeping it as an independent voice that they can vouch for, essentially.
Mhm.
But especially in terms of, like, if they bring an early draft in and we see that they've missed an entire area, or we see that they've positioned something in a way that really doesn't align with how CCC defines it, then those would be the kind of things that we could reorient.
Perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping
Yeah.
for.
And like I said, their early kind of schedule timing was the first 2 to 3 weeks would be spent on that RFI and feedback process, and then they would kind of go into more of a longer analysis phase. But pretty quick they would start having drafts, because they said that they expected it would only take about 8 weeks once we actually kicked off. So they are going to be getting back to us with an updated proposal that kind of addresses many of these items that we questioned, including the timeline and things like that, with licensing, etc. So we still need to have one more discussion, at least as a committee, before we finalize our decision here. So no decision is required today. I gotta say, for me, these guys seem like a really good option. I question whether we'll find a better deal if you factor in the combination of external reputation, familiarity with the topic already, price, and timeline. I don't think we could ask.
Well,
We could expect more.
yeah, we know that Forrester won't be able to deliver that, and Frost
No.
and Sullivan's questionable. I think one of the things that I didn't know about Everest that came out in the conversation is Everest. It sounds like much of Everest's business is actually supporting the global systems integrators.
Mm.
Yeah, I got that impression as well.
And when you think about kind of organizations in the world that are going to help drive adoption of confidential computing, the GSIs are a really good place to start.
No,
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they referred several times to, Accenture and stuff like that. And I agree with you, David. That's if there's a space to get this more pervasively understood, that's it. So,
Yeah, so I thought that was a nice collateral benefit.
right.
So would they be going out to the GSIs and asking people like Accenture, what is your vision of, or what is your
Yes.
knowledge?
Yeah,
Like,
they actually included that in their proposal.
Yeah.
Specifically, was a focus on, or one of the pillars, probably not the right word. One of the engagement sectors was the GSI sector.
I think that could be valuable.
Yeah, and that was the source of some of the initial perspective that we saw in the proposal document has come from their conversations with the global integrators,
Right. Right.
as well as some of the Indian outsources. It sounded like a mix of the two.
So I guess as far as what to do with this, I'm expecting an update from them within a couple days. I'll distribute that out to the outreach committee. I think we could come back next week.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm open to input, but I think we could come back next week and basically consider an up or down on it.
Yep. Does that work for anybody? Does anybody have any first of all, any questions based on what Jesse, any other questions based on what Jesse just shared here?
So Jesse, if we made a decision next week, which is basically the 1st of April, when would they be able to launch? Would they be able to launch fairly quickly after that?
They said that they're going to give us a little more detail on the timing
Okay.
aspect, so I'll withhold a final answer on that, but it sure sounded like they were ready to go. I mean, they have been assessing this market for over a year now already. And so this is already an area of familiarity with them. Obviously, they've got to build out that RFI and go through that, gathering process because they're going to go a lot deeper than they have so far.
Right.
But they did not express any, at least in the meeting, they did not express any limitations on getting started.
Good. So we could
Yeah.
possibly have this sometime in June.
I think that seems feasible. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think one of the gating items will be the discussion you referenced, Jesse, which is the scope of the market that we want them to size and assess.
Yeah, and
so
that's going to be on
that will be an
us.
important discussion that we'll have to resolve and give a clear answer to. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we've got a good. I think Dave, you did a good job of me yesterday, kind of laying out kind of the full breadth of possibilities in that. And then from that set of possibilities, we'll have to pick which ones we want included in the consideration report and which ones we want left out.
Yeah, for everybody else, the definition of confidential computing is fairly broad. It includes things that are already mass market, right? And it was pointed out that it's not the unknown that we're looking for to estimate the size of things that are well-established markets that people already know about, right? And so what's the right scoping that fills in the gaps and doesn't result in headlines or things like the confidential computing market is X when it really is only a subset of the full definition of confidential computing. Right. It's the part that we don't know about that's emerging, right? And so that was the discussion. So what's the right framing that doesn't result in a bunch of research that nobody is actually asking for, right?
So
yeah.
Hey folks, a quick question.
Yes.
I'm afraid I actually have to step away, but do we feel confident that it's still going to hit the 60,000 mark?
Yeah,
Yes.
they didn't budge that at all.
Okay.
That's their proposal is specifically for that amount.
Cool. So I
they're,
mean, like
they're kind of approaching it from this is what you'll get for 60,000 rather than this is what I'm going to give you and this is what I'm going to charge.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I took it as since they've already kind of been looking at it for a year, it looked to me like 60,000 is what it would take for us to do the deltas between what we already have and what you guys want. So
Yep.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
Okay. The only reason I was looking at asking the question is because you have this in your budget, so
Right.
there's nothing to slow you down in that decision.
Yeah, we can make that call ourselves.
Yeah, like if they were suddenly going to jump it to 90, then
yeah,
I would start prepping the board now for you guys just to say, look, we need an extra 30 in the budget.
I think we should hold the line on 60, and they haven't complained at all about the 60K price, which tells me we probably could have gotten it for less, which means we can push them a little bit to add some things along the way.
Well, I will trust all of you collectively to be much better negotiators than I ever am. So I'm just, like I said, just trying to make sure that there's no hiccups or holdups here.
Yeah, it's just
Um,
Linda can vouch for it, Steve. It's just a function of working for cheap startups. So
Yeah, no, I get it.
you want how much for that?
Trust me, I had
Exactly.
easier times spending money in the startups in which I've worked than I do at Microsoft. So
Well, I think when we saw what we got from Market Digits, and I know that was only like $4,500, but
Yeah,
I
it's
think
like
60,000 might be well spent in this
exactly.
case.
totally agree.
That was a good exercise. So, all right. So for everybody to know, so if we want to do an up down next week, we will need a quorum in order to approve the start of this project because it involves spending money. So
Okay.
all quorum people, I hope you can make a repeat appearance next week for us.
And if you don't, he's going to do it by email immediately after the meeting.
I will call and hound you until you give us an answer.
Well, you do what you need to do to keep
Yes.
folks focused.
Okay.
Yep.
right.
Take care, folks. I have to step away.
Right. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for joining. So, all right. Any further comments on the Everest group? Good. Jesse, thanks for pushing this along. Let's plan to get the proposal on the agenda next week. Do we want to try and have the TAM discussion next week too? Or is that going to be too, do we need a little more setup for that?
Just my thought on it is, I think Everest may have a few questions for us
So
to
let's let
help
them
us
guide us through that. Let's let them
accurately.
guide us through
Yeah.
that process. Yep.
Exactly. That's
Okay,
what I was thinking.
Okay, that's fair. That seems like that's like a good approach. All righty. Good. I'm going to move us to our next agenda item then, which is we had a follow-up on evaluating event sponsorships. We looked at this a few weeks back in the context of SciSat and OC3. And after having exercised the process, thought it would good to go back and look and try and make it a little more specific. Linda and I started with what we had used previously in our meeting, adjusted and added a few things to it. I would not say this is a radical change. It's more of a refinement. The goal here is to, as much as possible, make it objective when we get a request from someone who wants to have their event be sponsored. So let me just take a moment. In order to keep the text readable, it's on multiple slides. There is a link to this document in the meeting email from last night as well. But the general criteria is we're still looking for events that advance the end user and the marketplace's understanding of confidential computing, right? Highlighting real world use cases. Important that we do want to try and get beyond just the developer community. The developer community is really important. We want to try and also get to the kind of the application owner side, trying to cover both sides of the folks, and some of the, at least in the broader set of events that we're doing. Still want to maintain that we're not looking to endorse vendors in this. Ideally, these are events that have a pretty broad audience. Ideally, these are events that have some history of kind of previous events that they can share with us, and there's some kind of credible plan for promotion. So, at a high level, those were comments. So actually, let me just quickly bounce through all these, and we can come back and talk through the adjustments we're going to make. We remember, if you recall, we talked about two levels, kind of an endorsement level and then a sponsorship level. In endorsement is us saying, hey, we think this is a good event. We think this is, you're going to help spread the word about confidential computing. We're not giving you any money, but we still think it's worth doing. And I think we can be pretty open with that and pretty generous in terms of how we hand those out to events, as just kind of cultivating the community. We would authorize people to use the logo on the website in those cases. We'd list the event on the website as part of our kind of broader promotion of confidential computing. So that one I think will be pretty straightforward. And I think by default, any event we get a request for, unless there's something really wrong with it, or unless it really is focused on a single vendor, is a good candidate for us to endorse, right? On the sponsorship, we actually spend money. I think the top level comment that Linda and I want to add here is that, our default position as a committee, we believe should be that we endorse but don't sponsor.
Exactly.
just because I think we need to protect our assets. And that's really, it's really up to the event owner to kind of demonstrate the value of the CCC of taking up the sponsorship level, right? And we're not going to be unreasonable about that, but we should just be clear that you start at an endorsement and then work your way up to sponsorship.
Right.
Okay. We'll want to make sure that kind of, it's paid support, still not endorsing. We do want to make sure the cost is consistent with kind of what we're going to get from it as the CCC. So, if it's a really small event, it should be a small price tag. If it's a big event, we can look to pay more. Events that have some history ideally are going to be what we really want to look for. We like physical events, and we can have them when the world allows and supports that. Okay. So I think that the two additions here, we're just trying to make sure that the default position being endorsed, making sure we're scaling the money with the audience, and that we're looking at kind of past results and past history as part of it. And then what we're providing hasn't changed much at all. I think, same promotional local usage. We just clarified on the sponsorships. We generally would do what's going to be like the second or the third tier. I think it was like a silver or a bronze sponsor, depending on whatever metals or gems are being used in a particular program. But we want to make sure that the cost that we're paying is same or lower than what other people are paying for their event, right? We don't want anybody viewing the CCC as a piggy bank. And then on what we received, I think we just updated this a little bit based on OC3, where let's ask for booth presence. Let's also ask for a chance to speak, either a keynote or breakout session. Both those seem to be reasonable requests, as well as our previous request of being able to follow up with the attendees afterwards.
So I just want to jump in here for a
please,
second.
Yeah, Linda, please.
Yeah, we looked at OC3, which I think everyone agreed was a good event for us to do. And we said, what are some of the criteria that helped us evaluate that one that we want to make sure will apply in the future? So things like we'd like to have the idea of the keynote or the breakout and the booth, et cetera. So we tried to say, let's use that as a case study. And from there, make sure that we kind of generalize to do similar types of good events in the future.
Yeah, a good point. A good point.
So just as a test case, can you say, in this analysis here, how would the open source summit fall?
Well, so I think we clearly would endorse it, right? Because it's supporting of the top level objective, so that it passes that threshold.
Yep.
On open source summit, then I think we'd want to look and see. So
because we have had booth and had our logo listed there, but of course it's a monetary cost, and so since you have to pay for that, in some sense you could treat that as a partial sponsorship in order to pay for a booth because there's budget involved, or do you consider that different from sponsorship? That's kind of the basis of my question. If other companies rank higher in, say, the donations and stuff, then does that give the appearance of endorsing those who paid more? And that's the test case that I'm kind of wanting to walk through here. So.
Sorry, say that last. Say that.
Yeah, I didn't quite get that.
Okay, so if you look at the open source summit, right, there's sponsors, right? There's diamond sponsors, platinum sponsors, gold sponsors, right? So if you go back to like 2019, just to take an example, right? Intel was a diamond sponsor, and Google and Red Hat were platinum sponsors, which are member companies, and Microsoft was gold, and silver was ARM, and others down the line things, all right? And so does that, what I'm trying to do as a test case is, would you apply the same criteria to things like the open source summit to say, okay, in order to get sponsorship, in order to get us to have a booth, is that sponsorship? If it is, then it would say, well, if you treat it literally, then the open source summit would not fall in here. That's kind of why I'm asking here, because maybe we don't consider us having a booth that requires money to be sponsorship, and that's what I'm trying to tease out.
I guess I would consider us having a booth and event a sponsorship because it's a paid engagement and a paid promotion.
I would also ask why you think these evaluation criteria would result in us not sponsoring the open source summit.
Gosh, I hope it wouldn't, right? Because
I'm
a huge fan of the open source
think I misheard that.
I want to make sure that this criteria is not going to be used to say that we don't want to participate in events like the open source summit, because so the thing that jumped out at me was, should not give the appearance of endorsing one member company over another, right? And platinum versus gold sponsors could, in some phrasings, be seen as endorsing there, and I hope that's not what you mean.
I don't see that at all.
No, that's not what we meant. No.
Excellent. Glad to hear that.
How about that?
I may also sponsor the event and get different levels of promotion. Right, because you can see, paid for events that offer an opportunity for CCC promotion and outreach. because member companies may get different levels of promotion outreach, and that's not what we mean by endorsing members, right?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Right, right.
They're other sponsors, so to speak, and they're paying for different.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
Yep,
so
I'm
here's
happy
here's
with the
an
clarifications.
here's another sort of test case.
Yeah.
There's a Seattle, I don't know, Cloud Tech Summit. I got the name wrong because I don't pay attention to it much. I went once.
Okay.
Excuse me. Oh, sorry about that.
Okay.
Which puts on what I'll describe as a thin veneer of neutrality, but it's essentially paid sponsor delivers keynote
Right.
one after another,
Mm-hmm.
with no presentation of open source or vendor neutrality outside of breakout rooms. And it mostly, therefore, felt like a vendor fest, right? Vendors pitching products. And so that is an example of an event that I would not want us to sponsor, even though on the surface it might look like neutral because there's many different companies sponsoring it. The content felt very vendor specific.
Yes, I agree.
I would agree, that would fall into, no, that's not for us.
So how does that play out with this criteria?
We may need to add that.
Yeah. So we may need to add a bullet about, basically pay to play.
Pay to play events. So I got to say, don't pay to play events are not eligible for sponsorship.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if the even large events, and I'm going to challenge that wording for a second, because even large events like Open Source Summit,
pay to play, so.
They are, right? If say a Microsoft does a platinum sponsorship, they will get a talking slot somewhere. So from a certain perspective, you can say it's pay to play. But if the goal of the event is neutrality, presenting open source, like there's a wording there I don't quite have right yet.
Yeah, because I don't think they have to be fully open source, right? Because I mean, some of these events aren't going to be open source necessarily centric events, but I think your point is we don't want to be paying vendors to tell their story to the world.
Yeah, that may not be the right wording, but I think we understand what you're trying to say, Ava. Yeah, obviously, whenever you sponsor something, you are paying to play, but there's, it's events where you just don't even get in the door without paying to be as a speaker, so to speak. And there's it's not looking at it from a content perspective. It's by who's going to pay to get on the stage. We may need to work that offline.
Do we have similar language to this, like in the bylaws or something about what we promote? I feel like I vaguely recall seeing something about other forms of content that we might just be able to pull from.
That's a good comment, Stephanie. I haven't seen those bylaws. Is that Stefano? Can you check that out for us, or Ashley? I'm giving Ashley her first action item.
Sorry, I'm chatting with mute. There isn't anything specifically in the charter regarding sponsorship, but I'll peruse through there and see if there's anything that's along those lines.
Not about sponsorship, but whether we have any sort of similar phrase about what we do and do. Yeah, exactly. Guidelines for content.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we can take that as an action item, and we need to review the charter anyway, so we'll add that to our list of things.
And it was interesting. So, Ava, you were saying when we were talking, I was using some of you have been contacted by Casaco Consulting about an event they're trying to put together in June, which I don't think we should do.
Right. That did not meet the criteria.
Because it doesn't meet the criteria, because it's a consulting firm trying to generate their business. They want to get to our members, not help us get to theirs.
They want to use our reach for their own.
But they want to use our reach, not us getting their reach. They've never done the event before, so we have no history of it, right? And so it was like that doesn't bring value to us for outreach. We're looking for people that have a bigger voice than we do. And so that was another kind of test case we exercised as we talked these through. Well, those are some good additions there. Are there any other comments or additions on this stuff?
And we'll send this out so you can spend more time reading it.
So I'll add these. There is a link to the document, and I did have to make it an Excel to load it onto the Linux Foundation
Okay.
site. So, so there's an Excel spreadsheet now on the Linux Foundation site that has all this in it, and we can make these additions there. So everybody's got it, and that'll be available as a reference for us then when events come in the future.
And we also, what we did, we have a form to fill out that basically looks at a number of criteria, and we completed the form for OC3 and for CISAT, and said, here's what, here's the questions we would ask for you to fill out if you bring this event to us, and here's what we would have thought.
I still have that open, but I do not. Sorry, I don't have that open anymore. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
But so that's what we would ask. If the other thing that's kind of key is we would expect someone to be sort of a driver sponsor of this within the organization. So for example, Felix says, we think this is a good event. We would like you for the consortium to participate. And then Felix would provide the information about how many people, here's what you get, etc. So there would be somebody within our group who said, yes, I'm the champion for this. And if event doesn't have a champion, that sort of tells you it's probably not the right event for
Right.
it.
I don't think I put that in this list here. Okay, good. We can continue to refine this as we use it, and we'll wait for next events then. All right, cool. The outreach committee. Cool. Great, so let's go back to our event. We had a good discussion last week to put some more structure around our CCC event. It sounds like we still need the feedback from Stephen to nail down the date. What other next steps do we want to have to try and get this happening? Just because first week of June is going to come very quickly. Ava, any comments on this one? I'm going to tag you there as our visionary for the event.
Hey,
sorry, I couldn't find my mute button.
Oh, sorry, it's okay. So we lost Ava.
So did we settle on June? Maybe I somehow
we didn't settle on that. We were leaning heavily towards that.
Right.
Okay.
But some of that hinged on can we get, well, what's Stephen's feedback on Lisa, which we have not yet gotten that feedback. And then the other thing was, can we get the right amount of staff? And on our last call, the answer seemed to be yes, but we were waiting on Stefano having an update for us on that. Stefano, would you like to share with the larger group?
Sure. So I think we have plenty of resources now to make this happen. So I think pinning down a date and then discussing, in terms of what we need from the LF, just getting a list collated so that I can bring that back to folks in IT and the events team.
Okay.
Good. So then let's try and nail the date down.
Well, can I ask a question?
Please just, yeah.
What it seems to me that the real guts of this are going to be those dev rooms.
Yes.
Right. I mean, the rest is just structure.
Right.
And so having the solid candidates and representatives for those dev rooms really seems to be key, and it seems like a lot of that would come out of the TAC and out of the projects. I guess that's the part I haven't heard much discussion about. We're outreach, we're looking at it from the broad event standpoint, and yet the heart of this would be what goes into those. And do we know what goes? I mean, do we know which would be likely the TAC projects and members that would fill those?
So to be clear, that's not about projects. The structure of an unconference is self-driven day of. What I'm looking for is hosts, people who are comfortable functioning essentially as a moderator and a facilitator of conversation. They do not need to be the tech expert for a given domain.
And I think, Ava, you said that those topics will get selected the morning of, right? It's not like we're going to have predefined track.
Exactly.
People are going to show up in the morning, and we just need to have volunteers who are going to be who are comfortable being really flexible on that.
Being really flexible and driving, if necessary, like people who know the community, people who know who's going to show up and could call on them to encourage a conversation if folks are not familiar with the platform, which given some of our constituent makeup, I suggest will have a little bit more facilitation than, say, the cloud native community where everyone's been on Slack together for 5 years already, right? We're going to have technical barriers to building the participation. So the skill set I'm looking for in the dev room leads is more about facilitation than technical skill right now.
And so I have to admit, this format is unfamiliar to me. So I don't know which parts are maybe normal versus not. But do we know? Do we have names for those people who are willing to do that
Not
kind
yet.
of open-ended
Not yet.
facilitation?
Nope.
Okay.
I'm looking for volunteers right now.
Would you want that now? Would you want the dev room people identified now, or is that later in the process, do you think?
I think Jesse's point is a valid one, that it's critical to the event success to have at least 4 dev room leads.
Okay.
And so if we announce the event, but then fail to get dev room leads, that creates a problem for us. So we should probably find those leads sooner.
At least a minimum set, right?
Yeah, okay.
Some anchor tenants, so to speak. We can always expand it.
So there's everybody's action item for the week is go see if you've got any volunteers that you can think of who want to do that.
So this is a topic moderator without knowing what the topic is.
Yes.
It's a facilitator. Yeah. Yep.
And I've done versions of this that were like super great and versions of it that were awful. Like having someone who has experience in the format and is really, really comfortable with the facilitation is super important. Like while the technical expertise might not matter, I think like we don't want people who are just like, oh, I'll give it a whirl, because it's kind of like bizarre and it can be totally stale. Or also like incredibly dynamic if you have the right person driving the conversation.
Do we have?
It sounds like you might be volunteering or know someone who'd be a good fit.
Yeah, actually.
I don't think I would volunteer, but I can poke around and see if there's any sort of like hub for this within Google, because I know there's been sort of like moments where we've done this as part of internal events.
Yeah. And Anne put together a really good one about a year ago, the Google Cloud Native Security Day, something like that. So
I'm not aware of it, but I'll connect with her for sure.
Okay.
Do we have example topics or topic categories? I'm still trying to figure out how I go about finding somebody.
I think the next thing I do.
This is very fun to watch, the tension between the unconference that Ava has in mind and the conference Jesse's used to running.
It sounds like the next thing I need to do is find a good resource for everyone in the outreach committee to learn what an unconference is.
That would be great. That'd be great.
And send that out, and we can discuss. I would say I will also, I'll take 2 actions here. One is I'll find that resource and send it out, and the other is I will set up a Slack channel for us all to discuss this in a Slack channel. That works much better for me and feels more in accordance with the goal of an unconference than email.
Ava, one question I have is for instance, am I looking for somebody who, like, what am I looking, what is the expertise that I'm looking for? Is it somebody who, for instance, knows a heck of a lot about open source? Or
Nope,
is it?
Nope.
Well, let me just give you my categories because I don't know. So I'm just saying, or is it somebody that is like basically the equivalent of a journalist who's good at interviewing people? Like, I don't know what skill set I'm looking for.
Stephanie described the situation well, I think. You're looking for someone who is dynamic and can handle a fluid situation in a room full of strangers and bring everybody to a positive shared experience.
Okay, but not necessarily topic expertise.
But I think they need to know, I think from what you're saying, I think they need to know enough about the topic that they can make connections and facilitate the progress of the discussion, right? Like I would not be a good fit for one of these sessions, I don't think, because I don't have a clue what half these people are talking about. So
I don't even know that that's true. Like, as long as we could
Um,
provide some seed topics, potentially to get the conversation going, I don't think subject matter is super important. It's almost more like just raw professional facilitation and an ability to sort of like get people talking and go with the flow. Like, when I think of people, it's almost like folks who have experience running things like design sprints, where you sort of like are used to kind of moving from broad to narrow, rather than someone who is a technical expert.
But
Exactly.
what is the objective of their topic discussion? Like, what are they trying to accomplish?
That's not for us to decide.
Right. The goal of the unconference, the reason people use the format is like to allow people to talk about what they want to talk about and what they're like excited about and they actually care about, rather than like us who, as not technical folks, might not like steer that conversation in the right ways. We can sort of like have prompts, but the whole point is like to bring it to the top, to naturally bring it to the topics that people care about and want to talk about, rather than trying to pre-prescribe that.
Exactly.
But okay, so understood that the topics are coming from the participants, but is the goal to start at one place and end with recommendations or next steps? Or
I think the goals, I think the goals come from the participants. Like, that's one of the first starting points, and then you kind of zoom out and think about how you get there.
Yep. And so examples of goals that I have seen emerge from these type of events in the past is anything ranging from how do we make A and B fit together? It looks like a round peg in a square hole. Who wants to talk about that? To here's a problem that I've had in my project. Have you had that in your project? Like everything in between. People sharing ideas, people sharing struggles, to solving real problems.
It would make sense for us to have like 4 really, really broad themes that I think like are even higher level than technical concepts, to allow people to sort of gravitate to similar roles, similar functions. So you're getting the right people in the right groups. But beyond that, it's pretty like self-defined and self-contained.
Yeah. And themes could be things like, I don't know, we could let's brainstorm in the Slack channel on that, because I know we're just about at time.
Yeah, so we're at time. So why don't we plan for next meeting? Let's have a discussion of, let's confirm the date and have a discussion of themes. And in the meantime, if anyone wants to volunteer themselves for their facilitation skills, or identify and volunteer someone for facilitation skills, let's start getting some names in as well, and we can start to build a list of people who might be able to help with the event, because that will be the kind of foundation of it. Does that work? All right. At 9 o'clock, we'll call it done.
Great.
Thanks, everybody. We'll talk next week. Have a good rest of the week.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Everyone.